So first things first, gentlemen, how are you?
Yeah, really good, man.
That's very good to hear. So
Yeah, we're good.
before we get into the record, I'd like to jump back to the beginning a little bit. Now, Arthur, do you remember your first impression of Louis when you met him at university?
I actually don't remember when we met, Laurie. Do you remember? I think we might have met in a club in first year.
I remember the first impression of you. I didn't know you, but I remember seeing you DJ at a flat party with some kind of funk records and you having a very nice time. And I thought, this guy looks quite nice. But then, and I think I was just like, nice one. That was like a kind of thumbs up. But then when we properly first met, maybe it was in a club. Maybe that's why we don't remember it so much. It was like one of those, I feel like I knew you pretty well by the end of the year, like definitely by like the start of second year. And I think that probably because we fostered our relationship when the times were quite hazy, and that's why it feels like we can't remember it that well.
I think we took it quite slowly at first, didn't we? Really, I think we might have been a little bit shy to really like jump straight in, but
Because how did kind of the band started to develop then? Because from what I understand is you all kind of met each other at university, all had very eclectic taste in music, but we're also already playing here and there. How did you kind of started working together then? Like you say, it was quite slow. So how did that process go in forming kind of this band and this project?
It started off just like as a kind of listening project, you know.
Yeah.
Like it was just like it was very, very slow. We'd just have small ideas that came from one or two people, and we'd each just listen in to the idea and just like play something really, really chilled out on the other side of it, you know. There was no discussion of like structure or like kind of songwriting. It was more about like long form, and like that's kind of like just what felt more natural because we had all this time and we were friends and none of us were going anywhere. There was no pressure, so it was just let's take it easy and just see what happens. And I guess that was the same thing with what we were doing with our friendship, you know. We were just like we're just hanging out, and it was really nice.
Was there kind of a eureka moment then when things started to click and you collectively thought, well, we should form a band, we should make this kind of, I don't know if official is the right phrasing, but we kind of should do something with this?
Not really. Okay. It was more like, there wasn't really a eureka moment. It was just like, we started doing it when it was really small, and gradually it just grew and grew and grew in size and scope of what we wanted to achieve. There's been moments when it's really not worked, you know, where it's been like, oh, this is really hard. And then there's lots of moments where it's been like, this is amazing, this is going really well. But I think that's just natural for everyone. I didn't think there's small eureka moments when you're like, this is amazing. But there's also so many other ones where it's like just a personal eureka moment in like a rehearsal room or like when you're writing, where it's like, this just feels good.
Because the first EP you kind of released was LINO. If we take a trip back to that EP then, and especially after having made this new first debut record, what do you hear when you listen to the songs on LINO?
Someone sent me their impression of LINO at 33 yesterday, and they said it feels very dark goth wave, which I'd never heard that before. But I think when you play it back quite slowly, maybe that's the impression it gives some people. I think now when I listen to it, it feels quite like, and maybe this is from a production point, it feels quite full. Like texturally, it feels like there's lots of things going on there, which is bizarre because I think nowadays we have so many more things going on, but we just have more space for them within the record because Dan's a much better producer than a lot of us. But musically, it definitely still feels part of us, and like I think especially some of the more ambient parts of that record are parts which we haven't forgotten, and they're parts we'd still like to explore. I think like when we finished Town Centre and with Bright Green Field as well, it was definitely a good thing to be like, we're not just a post-punk band, but we've still got like part of LINO within this record, and that, I think that's quite important to all of us, to like not feel like we've been curtailed too much into a specific genre.
And because it was mentioned in the bio, I believe as well, but that sense of experimentation or challenging yourself to kind of do something differently every time, where does that come from? Was that always there in all of you?
I think that was just a group decision. I think it's just a really appealing notion to us.
Sure.
You know, it's like, it's just so freeing, and it's so nice to not have to concern ourselves too much with any one style or genre like that. Yeah, it's been something since when we very, very first started playing that we've just as a group decided would be the easiest way out.
Yeah, I think we probably naturally gravitated towards each other because we knew that we like to experiment in that sense, and so naturally the music coming out in that form seems like the kind of most obvious thing that should happen.
Sure. Laurie, you mentioned kind of these listening parties initially, so I'm trying to venture a little bit more in kind of your individual taste in music. What was one type of music or band or something that you kind of brought to the group?
Well, I guess in my first and second years, I was predominantly musically, although I was playing my instrument occasionally, I was predominantly DJing and running a club night in town. And I guess in first and second year, more of the music I listened to was electronic at that time. So I think naturally that probably steered the band in some direction, but because I think Ollie and Arthur and Louis, maybe less so, Anton to some extent, are all big fans of kind of experimental electronic music. Okay. I think when I joined, it wasn't so much that I was steering the band in that direction, because I was playing the cornet and playing much more kind of ambient, jazzier kind of things. But I think from having conversations like that, and especially in the last couple of years, like we've delved into that side and would like to continue to explore the kind of weird electronic side of ourselves, and Warp's a very helpful catalyst for that.
In what sense? In the sense that they allow you a lot of creative freedom?
Yeah, I think so. They just kind of described as a experimental band on paper, which I think is like, for me, seems such a kind of nice freeing emblem to be like, you can do what you want, whether that's weird electronic music or kind of drony jazz music. They basically give us a clean slate, and also being on a roster of artists which are quite inspiring in that manner. I think, I mean, it's hard to say because we've had coronavirus, so we haven't like met that many people personally, but like naturally just listening to more artists that are on Warp is inspiring enough.
And then Arthur, what was something that you kind of a musical style or something that you kind of brought to the band?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Now I was gonna say it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of that you kind of forced it on, but just something, maybe an influence that that surprised the rest of them, or something that you're really into and maybe the rest less so?
While I was growing up as a kid, I was being taught the cello and like lots of Hungarian folk music, and because my teacher was Hungarian, and the music school I was with were really into like traditional folk music, and I think that somewhere in my brain that education just cannot escape. Right. And now like I always have this kind of like tendency towards the similar kind of like harmony in these early songs that are in my brain. So I think that's something which it's always kind of come back again and again. I don't think it's so like obvious, maybe completely not apparent for the listener, but for us and for me, I think it's something that is something quite personal to me that will always be there, I think.
And I found that, I don't know if you agree with this, but I've found that over the last couple of years that genres started to blur a lot more than they maybe have done in the past, that a lot more is possible. Do you feel that is true as well? That you can do, that you hear a lot more eclectic music and that you're allowed to do a lot more eclectic music?
Well, we're the first generations to really, we're the first like age, and like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are like among the first ages to have grown up with streaming. And surely it's a natural progression that those who can listen to everything and anything on demand whenever they like, without the real care too much for where or when it came from. I think, that's only natural that we're going to have less of a kind of less barriers.
So with all of that in mind, what was the starting point of the debut album? Was there a kind of maybe this is too official and I'm not imagining it right, but was there kind of like a meeting where you kind of sat down?
No, you just have to do it, don't you? Like, we just signed to Warp, and it's like it's in the contract, so we've got to make an album.
Yeah, that was the meeting.
Yeah, it's like, right, we've got to do an album now. Shit.
Where do you start then? Because I believe, was the lockdown already happening at this point? Or did you write before kind of the whole COVID thing?
Yeah, but I think it's definitely something that's been on our minds for the last 2-3 years. But at the same time, go with at the time kind of direct in what form we'd put it as. But I think we all really wanted to have a cohesive body of work. Like, you know, that was like definitely something that we all wanted to do. And so naturally, when we were playing some of the tracks that are on the album, but some that have been rehearsed live and performed live like a lot of times. I guess when we were writing, after we kind of like had finished 2019 and finished all the tours, we sat down and we were like, right, we need to write some album tracks. And then the kind of tracks that we'd played for the last couple of years, like slipped in as well, and then including the new ones, and like kind of meshed together.
Because what you mentioned, is that a tricky thing to do, to kind of, because your music is quite eclectic, I would say, and to create a cohesive whole out of that, is that a tricky thing to do?
Yeah, it wasn't easy.
Quite tricky. Yeah.
There's a lot in the bin, you know. There's a lot of music which is like, okay, this is not quite right, or this is really bad, or like, this is good, but it's not right. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of that in the bin, and it takes a lot of time. There was a lot of pressure on us as well, you know, like we just had some like really well received like releases, and it's like, okay, like what do we do now? But like we took our time, and like it's just like, I don't know, it just went, we just took our time and like did it in the most natural way possible, and just really like stumbled to the line, and put in as much work to it as possible.
This might be difficult to describe, maybe, but what were you looking for, so to say, in songs? When did you know that, okay, this will work and this won't?
It's just a group decision, you know. It's just like it just has a feeling that we can all decide. We all know, and it's very clear to us when it feels right and when it doesn't. And it's impossible to say what we're looking for. It's just it's just like whatever makes us happy and makes us feel good at the time. It's really impossible to say. Really, it's no like magic.
Right.
It's just like just luck, really.
What was the first song then that kind of got fleshed out that ended up on the record?
The first track we wrote for the record.
Yeah, that kind of formed, maybe you didn't, but that kind of formed maybe a blueprint for what was to come after.
Well, the earliest track we wrote on the record is Paddling, the single that we've just released. But funnily enough, it was the last track on the record that we decided to add as part of the album. And when we were in Chippenham writing the album before we went to dance studio, we kind of started playing it again and thought, with a bit of reworking, it could really work within the context of the album. So yeah, that was probably written like 3 or 4 years ago. Okay. But the rest of the tracks are kind of 2 years max in terms of how old they are.
Do you remember what the starting point of Paddling was? Kind of the original idea of where that song came from?
Yeah, me and Anton were having a little jam, and he had these really nice little melody, kind of spooky melody, that is just repeated throughout the whole track. And I wrote that little euphoric ending thing that happens at the end, and that's all we had at the beginning. And then we just gigged it loads at that stage, didn't we? And then it just became this kind of it just evolved, everyone adding their bits, and I think it was one of them songs which really had just so much input from everyone, you know what I mean? So many of every song always does, you know. It's just it's always it starts off at one point and then everyone adds in their voices, and then it's wow, okay, this is really saying something that we all agree on. Do you know what I mean? Where it's it has this feeling here and there, and it's just like I say, it's just luck, you know what I mean? It's just you just throw loads of stuff on the table, and sometimes you look at it and you're like, oh look, you got 5 different voices here, this actually works. But it's no it's just time and patience, really, and it just worked really well that time.
And the interesting thing, I suppose, about this time is that you mentioned the playing live and kind of testing that song out. And I don't know if this is right, but you have LINO in the town center, and then natural resources, and you were kind of on this upward trajectory to these to the debut record. And like you said, there was some attention, which made added pressure. But then all of a sudden, the whole world shuts down, basically. So was that kind of did that kind of halt your momentum as a band?
I guess it definitely gave us a lot more time to think and reflect. And I think it was probably actually super helpful for shaping the record and making it quite cohesive, because there were a couple tracks which were completely kind of finished during lockdown that we wrote in Chippenham before the album was recorded. And I think we kind of, as well as having headspace individually and time away from touring to let ourselves kind of think, we started sharing ideas, not just musical ones, but kind of literary and influences and various different things on an online folder. And I think that kind of, although we were in 5 different places, got us into the same headspace. And from there on in, we started, well, once we'd once lockdown allowed, we then went to Chippenham and kind of compiled all those ideas into musical forms.
Yeah.
So I think it was like massively helpful. However, I'm sure we'd have written an album had there not been a lockdown. I just think it would have been probably less, I don't want to say less considered, but like more live. Like it would have been much more of a live album, just because that's naturally what we've been doing. Right.
And you mentioned going to Cheltenham to write, and I believe this was in a local pub or a local bar.
Yeah.
What was that like? One, kind of being in the same room again, but also kind of fleshing out the album. What was I don't know how long you stayed there, but what was that period like?
It's quite like it's quite amazing to be able to be doing what we were doing. I think we felt incredibly lucky, and just like that we were able to be like sat together in our breaks. Like for me, like the breaks when we were just sat outside around a table in the pub garden, just chatting, eating lunch. They were so nice, and like musically when we came in, like there's just an explosion of noise, we had to take a while to really get back into like listening and playing in a kind of in a sympathetic way with each other, because it'd been so long. But the ideas and the noise and the like the music was there. It was amazing, really, and it was emotional at times. It was really, because we had, some of us hadn't. I just felt like we'd been torn away from what we loved and who we loved, and like we couldn't do. We all were. Everyone was having a hard time. So there was that also underlying sadness to points of it. Like it's like, this is amazing, but it's also like, this is fucking weird.
Sure. How much of this sentiment kind of seeped into the record thematically then, or if it did at all?
I don't know. I don't know. It's like, it's not like, it's impossible for us to say, but like, I think there is definitely a side of the album which represents the kind of some sort of loneliness and sadness. Yeah. I think there is that definitely that undertone to some of it, but then there's also tones of hope and uplifting energy in there as well. So like, it's not to say that like lockdown happened, then it became this kind of like depressing doom and gloom thing, I think like there's definitely a thoughtfulness that may not have been there otherwise, but it's hard to say.
I think consciously, like there were the thing about like the voices that, so there's various voices of our friends that play out at different points within the album, and I think that was probably one of the only conscious parts where we were like, oh, this is a lockdown, and like we haven't seen these people in a while, and how can we make a piece of art which they're involved with somewhat. And yeah, apart from that, I think what Arthur said about like we kind of, when we were together, we had this idea that loneliness was a reoccurring theme within the album, and I think that was definitely in part influenced by us being alone and at home during a pandemic.
Sorry, when did the album title pop into kind of the band? Was that very there late from this? Okay.
Yeah, very late in the game. I think that was maybe, people ask us how it was hard to write the album. I think that was probably the most difficult part for the five of us. We had huge list of dreadful names.
Can you share one that didn't make it?
Dating Love. Okay. Nice. I'm glad I got that one. It was Anton's favourite.
What solidified Bright Green Field then?
I think like we'd been chatting about various different themes that ran through the album, or maybe not ran through the album, but they felt relevant somewhat musically and lyrically. And one of them was this idea of the uncanny valley, and how, I guess, like a lot of the time you can see something which looks a certain way on paper, but then if you delve deeper, it looks slightly like unusual, slightly off. And I think that was maybe a feeling that a lot of people had during lockdown, like ourselves included. And like, yeah, I guess that, like, you know, you've got this field which is beautiful and like is often what people aspire to and what people like associate with their childhood or like pastoral England, but then you look a bit closer and it's slightly bright and slightly artificial. And I think yeah, I don't know, that for me, that's kind of how for me personally it works, but like I think we all have different reasons, but it just seemed to fit within the five of us, which was a really nice point when we got to that.
Final question then. I believe the album is coming out in May. I don't know what it's like in the UK at the moment, but what is kind of, how do you look towards the future in terms of playing live and kind of now that you have this body of work to kind of present it to the world?
I think we've got some tours coming up and we're kind of just raring to go. Unfortunately, maybe those tours will be more UK based in the coming months, but only time will tell. And yeah, it's funny having music that we've now written a long time ago, well, ish, that we haven't toured yet. I think we're still really excited to play lots of the tracks, but also to play new songs to people as well that we've written more recently. And yeah, I guess just have a kind of mixture, but like the live set making it exciting in its own right, rather than it just being like a kind of playback of the album, I think is something that's important to us.
So can I assume that you've already been writing for what potentially could be album 2 then?
You could, yeah, man. Yeah, like straight on it. Like,
okay,
we're getting ready to record that now.
Okay, that's very good to hear. So you've really taken this time of stillness, I suppose, the last year to increase productivity.
Yeah.
That's very good to hear. Well, I wish you all the best with the debut album then, and I can't wait to see what you've come up with for the second one. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much. Nice to meet you.